but balanced design, unique to Korea.
안녕하세요. 프라우드 코리아입니다. 도자기의 역사는 대략 기원전 6000년 이전으로 추정되며 인류의 역사와 함께 아주 밀접한 관계를 가지고 발전해왔습니다. 수많은 나라에서 도자기와 같은 것들을 만들어냈지만 우리나라의 경우 세계 최초로 경질자기를 만들어냈을 만큼 우리나라의 도자 문화는 세계에서도 손꼽히는 우수한 문화 중 하나로 인정받고 있습니다. 음식을 담는 데 처음에는 나무 그릇이나 바구니 등을 썼지만 흙으로 빚어 구워내는 방법을 알고 나서는 토기를 제작하여 사용하기도 했고 통일신라 시대부터는 수준 높은 토기를 생산해내어 단순 부장용이 아닌 일생생활용으로도 사용했던 것으로 추정되면서 전 세계를 놀래키기도 했습니다. 이 때문에 도자 문화가 뛰어났던 조선시대에는 일본이 질투에 임진왜란 당시 수많은 도공들을 강제로 일본으로 데려간 사건도 있었죠. 이렇게 오랜 시간 발전해온 한국의 도자기는 다양한 종류가 있지만 보통 한국에서 도자기라 하면 고려청자와 조선백자를 떠올립니다. 그중 조선의 백자에 대해 얘기하자면 조선 백자가 중국과 일본의 것과 비교해 탁월한 점은 겉보기에 화려하지 않지만 소박하고 친근감을 준다는 것이죠. 장식면에서도 여백의 미와 절제의 미가 있어 중국과 일본의 것과 같이 빼곡히 그림을 그리지 않고 많은 공간을 남겨 보는 사람들로 하여금 편안하고 여유를 갖게 만들기도 하죠. 그런데 이런 한국 도자기가 가지고 있는 미묘한 색감과 여백과 절제의 미를 알아본 한 교수가 있다고 합니다. 하버드 대학교 미술관에서 수십 년간 전문가로 일하고 현재 록펠러 콜렉션 아시아 미술에서 한국, 중국 도자기와 관련한 일을 하고 있다고 전해지는 로버트 모어리 교수인데요. 그는 한 강의에서 중국의 도자기와 한국의 도자기를 비교하며 한국 도자기의 아름다움에 대해 설명하고 강의 말미에 한국을 방문하면 어디로 가는 것이 좋냐는 청자의 질문에 서울도 추천하지만 경주도 꼭 들려봐야 한다는 말을 해 정말 한국 예술 전문가다운 모습을 보였는데요. 오늘은 해당 강의를 요약, 번역해 전달해 드리도록 하겠습니다.
So, by the 16th century, they're producing extraordinarily beautiful white vessels. And keep in mind, the taste in Korea was basically for pure white, undecorated vessels. But of course, they made others as well. So you get some brown and white pieces. We don't get brown and white pieces, that is in porcelain, in China. So this is unique to Korea. It's hard to tell what it is. Is it a bottle on a leash with a collar around the neck? Who knows? It's a kind of a whimsical design, but extraordinarily well done. But then we move into things like this, which are truly beautiful. Now, we are told by records that court painters were sent from the royal palaces in Seoul to the kilns to train the potters, that is, the ceramic decorators, how to paint in a court style and such. And one thing that we see, knowing that connection, is we see a much closer correspondence between painting on paper and silk in Korea and decoration on ceramic ware. So you look at that, then you look at a painting, contemporaneous, on silk, and put them side by side, and you see that the relationship is pretty close. But there are relationships that are even closer. This is moving on to the 17th century. And when we see Korean pieces, by the 17th century, we're seeing a distinct aesthetic vision different from that in China. In China, you think of the entire vessel being decorated. You think of very heavy, emphatic borders, top and bottom. Here, the upper portion of the vessel is decorated, but in addition, it is an asymmetrical but balanced design, unique to Korea. Where did that type of design come from? Again, look at the painting tradition. This is a pair of album leaves by the same artist, closely related. Put it side by side, and once again, the decoration that you see on that jar over there in underglaze iron brown is right out of the painting tradition. Not necessarily this painting, but something very close to it. Where you look at something like this, and for a long time people, what is this weird design? It is a orchid and rock kind of decoration, a little bit harder to recognize in the ceramic piece, but even in the 19th century, I'm just showing you across the board down to the 19th century from 17th, 18th, 19th, that close relationship between painting and ceramic decoration persists in a very, very interesting way. It's not that you don't get it in China, but it tends to be more in enameled wares and not quite as close as we see in these Korean traditions. Now, in the late 17th and 18th century, we begin to see more blue and white ware. Again, in many cases, there will be no borders. It will be a very quiet, a very austere, a very subtle presentation. In this case, just a sprig of bamboo, and there is a taste for faceted bottles. Of course, sometimes they have circular ones or a circular footprint, but that's an octagonal bottle. No particular symbolism to it, they just like the appearance of that. Sometimes these are always called wine bottles, and many of them probably were. But when we look at paintings, and this is not so much a full painting per se, but it's a detail from an altar spirit painting. When we look at it, we see the altar table here and plaques to the ancestor there. But here's a bottle, here's a bottle. They're serving as vases. In this case, here's a detail, the bottle that we saw, and a bottle very similar to it, whether it's faceted, whether it's circular, but it has either a single little floral spray or a bamboo sprig, something like that, a lotus and feathers and things like that. So just to give a hint of how these things function. Again, always there is a taste for the pure white. Usually it's not absolutely pure white, there's just a hint of sky blue to the glaze. As you can see, we're at pools in some areas like that. But apart from that, of course, there are blue and white pieces. Very subtle again, usually. Often, not always, but often lacking borders, or if there is a border, it's just a so-called bowstring line framing the design. And once again, you want to tie it up with paintings. This painting could have served as the model for that. If not, it was something very close to it. But in blue and white ware, brown and white ware, these various wares, there is always a close connection with painting on paper and silk. Almost there. Whereas with the very best of the Chinese blue and white, we think of a very rich, vibrant, deep royal blue, sometimes even a navy blue. The very best of the Korean cobalt blue tends to be much more subtle. Light blue like this, often with a slight undercurrent or slight almost silvery feeling to it, as you see here. This is a jar in the Rockefeller collection in New York of a crane descending between pines under moonlight. Extraordinarily well done. Of course, the most famous of these Joseon blue and white jars from the 18th century are the dragon jars, which present a striding dragon, as you see here. This is the 18th century type. In the 18th century, it has the proportions that we see here. The bulging shoulders, a relatively short... Yes? What do you want, should you take a trip to Korea, which I highly recommend, what do you want to see? Do you want to see museums? Do you want to see historical sites? Do you want to see Buddhist temples? Because they're sort of in different places. Some of them overlap. You mean active kilns or historical? Well, it's hard to see some of the historical kilns, but if you wanted to, you could make arrangements to see snow porcelain, that kind of thing. But I would say, first of all, you want to visit Seoul. You want to visit Gyeongju. You want to see the museums, the historical sites, and the Buddhist temples that are there. And so for two sites, I would say Seoul, Gyeongju. You won't see everything, but you will see a great deal, and you will see a great deal of wonderful sculpture, architecture, ceramics, painting, all kinds of things. Now I think we do have to stop, but thanks so much for coming.
시청해주셔서 감사합니다. 구독과 좋아요, 그리고 알람 설정 부탁드립니다.